Thank you for joining me. Hi, I'm Angie Kane, creative director of Jolly's Mill Pond and also founder of the Raw Land startup. Uh, Ours is an interesting story, and it started about 12 years ago. We packed our kids and our two-bedroom apartment and uh, left Brooklyn in our rearview mirror, and we made our way slowly to Virginia, where we became the owners of Jolly's Mill Pond. And it upended so much of our life from that point on, to the point that I wouldn't have predicted that I would be here talking about our story right now. When we moved into my husband's childhood home. And it was crammed with all sorts of interesting antiques that took about a couple of years to process. While we were doing that, we were still figuring out how we were going to be able to protect the character of this unique property that we were now stewards of, but still make it pay for itself. I come from an IT and marketing background and now also a filmmaking background. And my husband had a strong IT background. So, how are we going to make sense of any of this? Well, it took us a little bit of time, several painstaking years to start to get a handle on the process. Our property is unique. It is a historic farm. It's mostly off grid. This past year, we put about 2 acres into production, and it has an unknown Black history that connects it to Colonial Williamsburg and other points in early Virginia. What makes the history so unique is that it reflects different facets of life in the 19th century in that area that kind of flies in the face of what a lot of us have learned over the years. For me, growing up in Brooklyn, Black history had a very flat, very limited narrative. It was limited to about 8 people, and we all know who they are. And it ended up having such a narrow context that it left a lot to be desired. Meanwhile, in our area, there were these people who were thriving and surviving despite the challenges they had grown up with. So for me, I thought that I was the first Black owner of our property, and turns out that I certainly am not. And there's a very interesting story with that I can get into later on. But really, the point of this recording in this stream is to share with people our story and the vision that we have, a vision that will hopefully be a model for other people who are also trying to make their family farms successful. So, a little bit more of my background. When I moved to Virginia, I started to dive into my lifelong dream of becoming a filmmaker. And I still consider myself a toddler filmmaker. For about 3 years, I worked on a documentary that ended up being aired on 70% of the PBS stations across the country, and we won an Emmy for that. Now, the documentary had to do with life in Richmond, Virginia's housing projects and the perspectives of 5 different people who were able to survive and thrive different challenging conditions. And it was a story, there were several stories of people who were completely contrary to certain popular media narratives about what happens in the projects. So that experience taught me a lot. It was life changing. It was life changing before we even won an Emmy. but it taught me a lot about the process of telling different stories. And in our case, we do have a different story. My husband and I are an interracial couple. At the time that we were first dating, we shocked a lot of people with who we are, and some of the uh, things that we ended up doing together. And certainly in this realm of farming in our area, we're a little different. Our vision is different as well. Don't mind me, I'm also looking at my notes to make sure that I'm not completely going off track here. But we consider ourselves stewards of the land. And despite the challenges that we've had with it, including a state mandate to the tune of currently almost $1 million that threatens to destroy the uh, core character of our property, we are still soldiering on. So, about that mandate, and it also ties into our history. We have a pond that was impounded sometime in the late 1700s or early 1800s. And our dam that impounds the pond is about an eighth of a mile long. It's an earthen dam. And according to historical records, that eighth of a mile long dam was created by slaves, like I said, sometime in the late 1700s to early 1800s. When they impounded that dam, they used earth that was carved out of one of our hillsides. So even today, you can see what looks like almost like a small cave. And that was where the earth was extracted to form the dam. So they took that, they created the dam, and then obviously over the centuries, um, you have trees that grew up along the edges of the dam. Why was the dam created? It was created to power a grist mill that was operational for 100 years, producing cornmeal and flour. And then in later years, it was used as an industrial mill. And we don't quite know right now what that use really was in terms of an industrial mill. So we have this dam that goes through our property. On one side, we have the pond, and we have multi-storied bald cypress trees. You can't quite see any of them here. I'll explain what you're looking at later. But we have multi-storied bald cypress trees. Some may be at least a few hundred years old. And we also have on one side of the dam a wetland, pristine wetland. We're located in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And for many of you who may be on the East Coast, you know how expansive that is. The Chesapeake Bay watershed includes multiple states, and it's protected because over the centuries, the bay became polluted, and the reason why our pond is important to the Chesapeake Bay watershed is that we have spillways naturally, and we are sort of a fourth level feeder into the Chesapeake Bay. So for that reason, we can't have non-native uh, varieties of fish in our pond because they can make their way into the Chesapeake Bay. Now, what does any of this have to do with being a raw land startup and turning dirt into profit? I will get to that in a second. So with these challenges, with our pond being part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, being mostly raw land, when we moved from Brooklyn, it was a head scratcher. I mean, not even a head scratcher. It was staring at a wall going, okay, so how do we do this? How do we protect the character of this property, but still make it pay for itself? And that's a challenge that so many people have to face. And they're more than I thought. When we first moved here, I thought we were the only ones. But then over the years, I started to meet more and more people who inherited family lands, but not necessarily the deep pockets. They needed to make that land pay for itself. And the last thing they wanted to do was sell the land or break it up or whatever. They actually wanted to pursue different options. So I called this recording. It was supposed to be a LinkedIn Live, but technical difficulties, I call this turning dirt into profit, because we are in that process. And we know that there are lots of other people who may be in the same position. So coming from Brooklyn, coming from an IT, marketing, filmmaking background, well, what did I know about running a farm and being a farmer? Uh, I can grow a decent tomato in the backyard. I don't know a thing about growing commercially. And it wasn't just about how do you farm, it was also about how do you make sense of what you can do on this land. We have different characteristics. We have, different types of texture to the land. We have forest. We have, a wetland. We have a body of water. And certainly for us as conservationists, we don't want to be those people who pollute the land, et cetera. Over the centuries, people have, well, actually, over the decades, because the property has been in the family now for 3 generations. And on top of it, we know that we have family ties that go back to the early 1900s on this land. So we know over the decades that the family has taken every precaution to make sure that the water isn't polluted. There are no gas boats allowed in the pond, that sort of thing. So how do you continue that kind of conservation tradition and still make the land pay for itself? So that was the start of our journey as a raw land startup. And if you're not familiar, raw land is land that doesn't have utilities. It's undeveloped. And I had no experience in Brooklyn with undeveloped land. Just pray tell, what do you do with it? Well, there are actually quite a few things that you can do to raw land and still protect its character and still make it pay for itself. When we got settled in Virginia, one of the things I looked into was, okay, where do you have situations around the world, not just in our neck of the woods, where people have these same concerns? They want to protect property. They want it to pay for itself. What is it that they do to make things happen? Well, turns out that there are actually 4 categories of things that people typically embark on when they are trying to make things happen with their raw land and turn their dirt into profit. And I use the analogy of a 4-legged stool. So you picture a stool. It would be helpful to have a graphic here, but picture a stool. And picture a stool with 4 legs. And each of those legs are a potential revenue stream for today's raw land startup. So let's start first with the obvious: agriculture. In most cases, it would be small scale agriculture. Typically, even within the United States, you have large acreage that's used for row crops like corn, soybean, and wheat. We didn't have that type of land. So what were we going to be able to do on relatively small acreage? And it turns out there are a number of specialty crops that are very profitable on even small tracts of land. I had a soft launch of a podcast. It's called The Raw Land Startup. And in the podcast, I talked to a number of people from different industries who make their profits off of raw land. So even with small acreage and sometimes even with inhospitable land, you can do things like small scale flower farms. I interviewed a woman who was operating basically out of her backyard. I interviewed another woman who was growing on a quarter of an acre. Flower farms, particularly if you pick varieties that aren't typically available in the grocery stores, maybe they don't travel as well, that sort of thing. Flower farming is actually a nice, profitable side hustle to start. I haven't been able to find too many people who made their millions off of a quarter of an acre of flower farming, but it's a good start, a jumping off point if you want to do something with your raw land and turn that dirt into profit. There are other types of specialty crops that also do well on raw land. These days, with the legalization of cannabis, you have people who can grow hemp, and hemp thrives in rough conditions. In one of my upcoming interviews, I interviewed a man who's been involved in the legalization efforts for decades, actually, and he's also a specialist in cultivating hemp on an industrial scale, et cetera. And he pointed out that one of the things that you get with hemp is that it's very easy to grow. And there's a reason why they call cannabis weed. Now, I'm not going to go super deeply into that, but those are just some examples of the type of small scale agriculture that can be profitable on raw land. And the other options, and it's one that we are in the process of building, is just starting a small CSA. If you are the person who is ready to dig in and do the work and find the customers and pre-sell your shares, a CSA is probably going to be a workable option if you're exploring small scale farming on your raw land. Uh, this, you could almost say that the sky's the limit, but that's not necessarily always the case. But certainly, if you're dealing with small pieces of land and you just want to get started, uh, small scale farming is definitely an option. Okay, so that's one leg of the stool. The second leg of the stool is accommodations or lodging. So we all know about Airbnb. We all know how short-term rentals can absolutely be profitable under the right circumstances. So you literally could start a short-term rental basically in your backyard, but let's say you have 2 acres of land. If they are in the right location near some sort of tourism destination, near a location that people want to access, you may actually be located near festival grounds or fairgrounds, or there's something unique about your property that where people just want to rest and relax in it. Short-term rentals are definitely an option, from Airbnb to VRBO to Getaway, Tenter. There are so many options where people can find ways to upload their property listing and have a 360 marketplace for promoting and booking their short-term rental. There's no commission or anything here. It's just fact. Now, obviously, these days, you really need to make sure that short-term rentals are allowed in your area. And that can change from one municipality to the next. If you already have your land, you need to really become familiar with sometimes the tediously boring zoning laws so that you can make sure that you're allowed to host a short-term rental. It's great if you have remote land. There are all sorts of interesting options for that, particularly if you have remote land that's within, say, an hour or two of a major city, because then your property becomes a great destination for someone who just wants a quick weekend getaway. They want to pitch a tent, get in, get out, and that's the end of it. But certainly research your municipality's zoning laws to see if they're allowed, and if they are, see what's happening in your area in terms of short-term rentals. Outside of your municipality, there may be challenges if you're in some sort of HOA, et cetera. So know the rules, know the laws, and see if that's appropriate for you. So that is the second leg of the stool: accommodations or lodging. The third is events. Events run the gamut from having like a cornhole party to a music festival. And it all depends on what's allowed in your area, what facilities you have. Now, you may have some raw land. Your land may be 100% raw, or you may have some utilities that you can hook into. There's a range of options available to you, even when you're in a situation where you have no utilities. So let's pick something like, okay, you've got desert land and you've got about 30 acres seemingly in the middle of nowhere. Think about things like Burning Man. It obviously is a festival that has had momentum over many years, but just think about the fact that that's a destination. You're talking about something in the middle of nowhere, and then at a specific time of the year, the infrastructure that's needed to host a festival, it's brought in and it's set up. People enjoy it, tear down, and then move on to the next thing. That can be an extreme example. I think for most people, maybe that isn't the case where they have 30 acres of desert land. Well, maybe you just have forested land. Uh, think about music festivals on a smaller scale, or maybe it's something small and intimate, a concert or something along those lines where you're bringing in vendors, etc., and you can build revenue from both hosting and having ticket sales, and also from charging vendors to have their food trucks, booths, etc., on your site as well. So that's the third leg of the stool: events. And I'm not being, I'm truncating that, but there literally is a universe of possibilities when it comes to events. And so that's something that I will explore more and more, both on the relaunch of the Raw Land Startup podcast, and as well with other things that we're doing on the launch of the website as well, because there are a million possibilities. This is really here as an introduction to who I am, part of our story, and then what the possibilities are out there. Now, I just want to put a little footnote on the events. One of the ways that we are putting that into practice is that because our history is one that's unique, and we have people from all over the country who've gone on tours to learn more about our history, we are planning events for 2024 where they're educational, they're history based, and they blend our unique approach when it comes to agriculture. Maybe it's not 100% unique, but we have a specific focus. Case in point, as we've been peeling back the layers of our history, we are discovering a lot about our property's Black history. It's like pulling a thread on a sweater. But we're also discovering an Indigenous history that we never knew anything about. We've researched maps from Captain John Smith in roughly 1609, where he had a map of all of the Native American tribes in Virginia. And it seems like there are at least a couple hundred. And he identified one tribe that was located in our area, potentially on our property. But then in doing more research, we discovered it could have been another tribe that it's essentially disappeared sometime in like about the 1600s or so. And there's only a little bit of archaeological evidence that is still available in Jamestown, Virginia. So with those histories that we're discovering, because we're foodies, we believe in quality ingredients, and we partner with our farm manager, who's also my food co-conspirator. And we've been diving into native varieties, heirloom ingredients that we are cultivating on the property. So as we do that, we're also exploring, well, why did some of these ingredients fall out of favor? Why is it that people are no longer preparing certain dishes? And by the way, how did these ingredients get here in the first place? So as we've been diving into the history of these ingredients, and our property's tagline is "We're where history meets the outdoors." As we started to dive into the history of these ingredients, it didn't take long before you discover that some of these ingredients were ones that were brought to the South because of the slave trade, and their roots are in Western Africa. We dive into that and we discover, wait a minute, in addition to that, we are discovering there are certain West African recipes that have made their way onto Southern plates. And so what's that about? And we've opened literally a can of worms. So our events, that leg of the stool, are being built around culinary heritage. And it's the culinary heritage of our property. It's part of what makes us unique. And so we're diving into what is it that Black people in the 18th and 19th centuries, well, what were they growing? What were they preparing? In addition to that, with Native Americans, first of all, which tribes were in the area at the time? What were they growing? What were they preparing? And then in some cases, and maybe in many cases, what were the cooking techniques that they shared with the Black people who were in our area? And another footnote to the history is that one thing I discovered, and it didn't take long to discover, there are long running lines of both Black and white families in our area that go back into the 1600s. It's Williamsburg obviously is an area that's steeped in history, and we are constantly peeling back the layers on that. So again, as we are where history meets the outdoors, it's really important to us that as we plan events, that we focus on that heritage element, especially the culinary heritage. And then finally, for the fourth leg of the stool, we have e-commerce. And need I explain what e-commerce is. Everyone knows what that is. But once you've identified the right audience, once you've identified the right products, it's another opportunity for many small farms, many raw land startups to produce revenue. On the higher end of things, like one of my muses is Blackberry Farm in Tennessee. If you go to their website, you'll see the four legs of the stool in practice, including with their e-commerce and high quality products that they've developed. Uh, so that's it for the four legs of the stool and the ways that raw land startups can turn their dirt into profits. While I was aiming for this to be an engaging, chat session, et cetera, on LinkedIn Live, but sometimes you have to pivot, which is another thing you have to do as a raw land startup. So if you like this, please leave comments. I'll be sharing this on social. It'll also be on our website. And then connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear your raw land story if you have one, or if you're even interested in building your own raw land startup. You can follow our journey on our website, jollysmillpond.com, and look for the rawlandstartup.com in 2024. And you'll be able to download episodes of the Raw Land Startup and all of our upcoming interviews that are in the can. I've had the privilege of speaking with so many interesting people who are really making things happen in the glamping sector, in the specialty farming sector. And it's really a treat to be able to interact with these experts. So stay tuned for that. If you're interested in the culinary heritage of Jolly's Mill Pond, also reach out to me. I'd love to hear if you would like to participate in any of our events. We are absolutely looking for corporate sponsors to partner with us to really provide us with a megaphone to spread the word about this unique heritage and all of the interesting things that we've discovered along the way. So if you are interested in becoming a sponsor, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or email us at visit@jollysmillpond.com. Thank you so much for watching or listening at your desk. And as we work through the kinks, I'm really looking forward to doing more of this in the future. So thank you for your time. I'm Angi Kane, and have a good day.